What a delight it is to welcome you back, Emily, to Who's to Say, soon to be Home Court Health. And we will be, I think, magnifying out the scope of our conversation on the court aspect since we share an affinity for the dynamic and terrific world of tennis. And as of this recording, it feels like the Australian Open is already leagues behind us. I mean, such
Yep.
is the nature of that calendar. Just like in the microcosm of the game, you're on to the next point. If you have a lag, if you let yourself be dragged down by the past, then you will falter. I think we're already seeing some players suffer a little bit from that.
Yep.
Uh, and as you may have seen, I entitled our last episode "Time Will Reveal All," and had tremendous feedback. So thank you for all of the pearls of wisdom you shared there. And it continues to motivate me to rarely start at the beginning or start at this current moment in time. I would love to chew on a morsel that you offered us last time
All right.
about the occult
Mm-hmm.
meanings or metaphors of tennis. And I'm happy to plead ignorance there because I have not given enough thought to that. I'm delving a little bit more into the history that was once very aristocratic for tennis, and then I just started diving into the secrets of Spanish tennis, which has been scintillating so far. And one of the things they talk about was Manolo Santana. There's a lot of courts named after him throughout Spain. He was a darling of Francisco Franco, and became a champion for making tennis a more proletariat, blue collar sport. And I can tell you from my recent experience, I have a little mouse under my eye where I got hit in the eye with a tennis ball recently, feeding tennis balls. It is a very blue collar sport. The things that I've done in my life. We'll talk about Gil Gross. I really enjoyed your interview with him. Wasn't sure if I think you dangled it out there a little bit when you asked him about, have you ever considered the gravity of things playing out on the world stage as they play out in the tennis world? But I'm starting to open myself up, thanks to you opening that portal of beyond the dimensions of the tennis court and of an arena. What are the implications that are more magical? So, will you kick us off with something hot there?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of take Gil's temperature since this was my first interaction with him.
Yeah, right.
Like, I think it went well, and he's, I think, probably open to again sometime in the future. So I just dangled it to see, and like
Good.
one of these days I'll press my luck and like
Yeah.
stretch a little farther or something. So okay, so like for me, my obsession with tennis and my ascent or descent, however you view it, into the world of conspiracy, esoterica, the occult, all of that kind of stuff, kind of happened simultaneously. I really always liked tennis. Like I told you last time, I talked about with Gil. My mom liked it, and it was one of the sports that like I didn't mind if that was on. I was a gymnastics, diving person, but my mom liked tennis, and I liked some of the characters. So even though I didn't really understand in the 80s and 90s really too much what was going on, I enjoyed something about it, right? And then in the sort of late 90s and early 2000s when we had this like huge cluster of like really good women tennis players that were compelling. Your Williams
Yeah.
sisters, your Capriati, Kleisters, Hennant, right? All of these people, like Steffi Graf was still a little bit around, and Monica Seles. I remember catching some matches between like Serena and Kim, or Serena and Justine, or Kim and Jennifer Capriati, that were like knocked down, drag out every
Yeah.
game to deuce multiple times. And I really got into that like battle of the will part of it. Like I could really appreciate that. And so from then I was kind of hooked. And then I started getting a little bit more into men's tennis towards the tail end of like Sampras Agassi's career and the beginning of Andy Roddick's like kind of rise. And from that point, I kind of preferred the men really. And that's true now. I prefer the men. I every once in a while I will find some of the women's tennis very compelling. And I actually think that the most compelling story of the entire Australian Open was Madison Keys. And
Fuck
I,
yeah.
right, I've long been a
Yeah.
fan of hers as a person and a tennis player. But so I can still be like I can still get into that, but for some reason for me the men's game resonates just more.
Oh, yeah.
So I started to like have my, awakenings to the fact that like there was the world we see and think we know, and then the world that we can't quite see and we definitely, didn't know about, at least then for
Yeah.
me. Um, and I started, getting into weirder stuff, including the rave scene, including starting to research, sort of, alternative explanations for things that were being told to us in our reality, specifically as it came to things like the drug war and
Mm.
certain things that were going on in our government. And eventually it landed me like plopped out, but in the middle of the conspiracy soup. And for some people, when you swim around there long enough, you kind of find your way a little bit more to esoterics and occult and things like that, and away from like the just standard conspiracies. And so I oftentimes would be like watching I'd have a tennis channel on while I was sitting at my computer doing my thing. So the two things are bound for me that way, especially like during my drug use years. I would be up all the time. And tennis is a 24-hour sport because it's happening every day all around the
Mm.
world and whatever. So tennis channel would be on. I'd be doing my research, right? And so the things were, at least once tennis channel came along, that is, right? And at a certain point, like I just started to recognize that certain like ideas or themes that were popping up for me everywhere also happened to translate into tennis. Ideas about tactics and chess and sacred geometry and sonics and optics and velocity and electricity and magnetism and archetypes and all of this kind of stuff, a little bit more than say in gymnastics, because in gymnastics, like you're with the gymnast for like a few seconds as they do their thing. You're not getting to know this character
Yeah.
unless they've been at the top of the sport for a number of years, like a Simone Biles or something like that, right? So I started to just be like, I was having these two things kind of going on simultaneously, and then they started to merge. And I remember like I started to notice that there would be a correlation between like stories in the news, right? And like things going on with the tennis players. So I had two things happen, and I can't remember if they both happened the same year or if one was one year and one was the next year. And one of the things was the one that was more like noticing the like news and geopolitics and then a player, right? When the round one of the Ukraine, well, actually, not round one, it was really round two, because back in 2008 was round one and 2014 was round two. But for most people who are paying attention now, they think of 2014 round one. So I'm talking about that. That was, we were starting to see Ukraine become this thing that like the United States had an outsized concern over based on like the size and location of the country. We started to hear these stories of like the rise of neo-Nazism, right? There and that there was some crossover between some of those groups in Ukraine and in Latvia, right? Which is another one of the countries sort of located in that area that used to be part of the Soviet Union and the Caucasus states and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so literally at like as we're driving down to go to Indian Wells, this story is in the news. And simultaneously, there was a tennis player, like we'll check how into the obscure of tennis you are here. There was a tennis player that I was just fascinated with for a variety of reasons named Ernest Gulbis,
Of
right?
course.
Who's from
Yes.
Latvia.
Fuck
And
yeah.
like I would say that guy, like he's crazy making because, like a little bit like a Nick Kyrgios type or something in terms
Yeah.
of like talent and attitude. But when that dude was at his peak level, I think that it was maybe the highest level I've ever seen. Like I remember like Roger Federer like one time saying like this guy is scary. Like
Had a handful. Yeah. He had total game. Nick's a good comparison. Net dasher, great reach, great,
just the velocity of their
oh yeah.
shots and their swing, and like when they get going on something like there's just they get into the god mode that
Yeah.
is like there's nothing you can do that is different than the god mode of like Riley Opelka or a John Isner just having a big ace day,
Yeah.
or Nadal or Djokovic having a not miss day. This is something else. This is just like, what the fuck is even this? Like the highest level of both athleticism and like chess and shot making, and I don't even know what to call it. It's like beyond a sport or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So if you look into Ernest Gulbis, right, his family seems to be like, one of these questionable kinds of families in Latvia, in terms of like, I think he comes from a pretty well-to-do family that may even have something to do with like what's considered like the sort of the royalty of that country. And sometimes he's made comments that are, some people would consider to be xenophobic or racist or sexist in nature. Like, I think it's a little different coming from him than exactly that. But some of the associations that were being hinted at in terms of tone, like, would not be that distant from some of the stuff that was being talked about as far as Ukraine and this connection to some of these groups in Latvia. So this was happening. He starts to go on a run there at Indian Wells, and then that continues through the clay court season, right? And so it's like, there's never been a rise of a Latvian tennis player before. And it's like weird that there's this, he's been around for a number of years, but all of a sudden he makes this surge this one year, right? And it's happening at the same time that this sort of geopolitical story and ideology is surging, right? I thought that's kind of interesting, like that right, like that there's this sort of microcosm, which is the tennis world, and the macrocosm, and like which thing is leading which, like what is right, like are they just rising simultaneously because the energetic connection, or the rise of one sort of predict or indicate the rise of the other? So I noticed that. And then the other story, which again I can't remember if it was the same year or 1 year after the other, I was out on the way out there, and on the way out there, I was listening to Tracy Twyman on the Clyde Lewis show, Ground Zero. And she was talking about some arcane, esoteric, mythological, ritual or something. And she was talking about this ritual where they would go to the desert to worship Venus and Serena. But she wasn't talking about the tennis players. She was talking about like the gods or the planet and the moon or whatever it is, right? And this was the year that Venus and Serena were returning to Indian Wells after basically boycotting it for all the years because of alleged racist booing or whatever it is, right? I'm like, I'm driving out to the desert, right, to the place where Venus and Serena might either be worshipped or booed. And Tracy Twyman is talking about it. I'm like, this is weird. And then that year was the year where I started to notice the amount of like, I don't know if at that time I would consider it surveillance, but yes, surveillance and data collection that was going on at the Indian Wells Tennis Garden, in combination with the fact that Larry Ellison of Oracle now owned the tournament and the tennis garden. And like, it was having weird stuff, like my phone dying real fast, right? Because it was like all the data was being sucked out of it. And I remember sitting in the stands at one point and looking up, and it was like the most immense amount of chemtrails I had ever seen in my life. And nobody else seemed to be cognizant of it, right? And I said something to my mom, right? And she was like, acted like she didn't know what I was talking about. And then the next time I looked up, there was a smiley face in like black, like particle, like kind of like the, what do they call it? Like the fly ash, the black chemtrails when you see them, or for me, I might consider it to be more like swarm nanotech. And it was like, there was an acknowledgement that like, you're aware of, it was like some sort of like weird, kind of thing in my hat, whatever it is. She saw it. I was like, do you see that? She was like, yes, I see it, but whatever. Right. So it became to me like a way for the, whatever I had learned about conspiracy, occult, whatever, to that sort of point, tennis became a way for me to like play out some of the like imaginary fantasies I have about where this could go. When I say fantasies, I don't necessarily mean good, bad, or whatever, but like once you start down a line of thinking of how far something could go, it doesn't mean that all those things are or will happen, but like, you know, how like what's controlling what? How does the world really work? Like how well can like our real lived experience sync up with tales and myths and things like that, right? Oh, look at that.
Nailed it.
and
Validation.
and it's what's weird is like it's predictive based on the camera, but it only ever does it when I've said something that it's like confirmatory to. It's fucking weird. So for me, from that point, I'm like, okay, this is an occult sport, and I am having an initiatory experience by engaging in this process. Like I am initiating myself into this sort of lodge of occult tennis. And I remember one time I did like I can't remember when I was watching like I think like after the Ernest Gulbis thing, and then like later I had watched some match where it was like maybe it was like the 2000, maybe it was before, maybe it was like the 2012 Australian Open where like it was like the 6-hour match between Nadal and Federer, or maybe it was another match, I don't remember what. And it felt like there was so much riding on it, like besides just a tennis match. And I was like, thought in my head, like, I wonder if like back in the days where like everything was like a monarchy, or like in the Greek, whatever times, that they ever used tennis to just make decisions about something. Like whatever happens in this match, that's the way this, whoever wins, like that person, that country, or that king or whatever is in charge. Because a lot of times you'll see the royalty sitting in the box, the French Open, the King of Spain,
Yes.
right? And so and you heard me in the episode with Gil, I looked it up, and I found this thing that was from the Treaty of Versailles, called the near the Palace of Versailles, called
Yes.
Tennis Court Oath, in which they would go to the tennis court to wrangle out their issues with the new constitution or whatever that they were trying to create. And I was like, tennis has always been part, or at least since its inception, has always been a part of deciding how things will go in terms of like the world stage. And so from there, I was into it. And then I started seeing esoteric shit everywhere, in like the Adidas ads during the US Open, in the like, I mean, in all of the commercials. Like I've done shows about the American Express commercials, about Chase commercials. I started to see that like, oh no, they're signifying all of these sort of occult axioms and principles and tenets. And whether or not I don't know how many people know, right? But certainly some people know. And there's decisions being made. And then also my good friend Jeff sent me this article once that talked about how the only ever known sighting of Satoshi Nakamoto was at game set match Federer at Wimbledon in a semifinal where he defeated, I can't remember who he was playing, right? There was a newspaper article about that, right? And then there was this theory that Satoshi Nakamoto had been a top junior tennis player and had played in junior Wimbledon or something at one time. I don't know, I'm not saying that this is a true story, but Jeff had found this article. So I'm just like, yeah, I'm sold on this. Like, I like making up stories about these possibilities. And I'm not saying I'm right about things, but there's been a number of things I've said that I think will happen based on what I've watched go on in tennis, or some of the associations. Like Rafael Nadal is like best friends with Larry Ellison. Bill Gates is like in love with Roger Federer, right? Novak Djokovic and Elon Musk are side by side in pictures on the board of the Tesla Foundation, Nikola Tesla Foundation. I'm like, these are like the tennis players are like some sort of like spirit animal or something like that of these tech magnates, right? Like they need a level of physical power that they don't have. They may have technological or even mental or financial power, but they don't have this like, level of built-in strength and force to carry one thing from one place to the other. And the big three certainly did, right? It's gladiatorial in nature. It's all that stuff. So that's sort of how it developed for me. And it's taken on different forms over the years. Like it's always been worked into things I talk about on shows. But yeah, so for me, the two things are connected. My conspiratorial or esoteric life and my tennis life like have this like middle point that they meet at, and there's so much crossover for me.
Thank you for recounting all of that. I mean, your chosen vocation as a professional dot connector is, I mean, it's great to watch someone in flow. You know, that was my experience with Robert, is in a 2-hour astrological reading. I mean, I hardly had anything to say because just to watch that again, you know, seeing the patterns, seeing relationships between two different nodes, two different aspects is so fascinating. Watching tennis for me is really the only time that I get to see commercials.
Mm-hmm.
And so, would you mind, for however long you'd like, specifically because Amex and Chase, two massive financial institutions, especially with what I'm sure it's different when you watch tennis in England or Australia, you know, whatever the local programming is there. But certainly during the majors, we get bombarded with and I'm watching on tennis TV, which is so worth. I implore any tennis fans out there, $120 a year. It's so worth it. The access, no commercials. You know, the microphones on court are great. It's such a better viewing experience for everything but the majors. It's all of the Masters 1000s, 500s, 250s. So worth it. But so for Amex and Chase, would you mind giving a glimpse into
So
symbolism that stands out from that?
yeah, so in the at the U.S. Open, the Arthur Ashe Arena is literally the Chase Bank symbol. Like when
Yeah,
the
yeah,
overhead shot, you can see that it's the Chase Bank symbol.
yeah.
So
And then you see the Chase logo, super brought to you by, and you just say, okay,
correct. So
there it
they're not
is.
playing in an arena that has the logo all over it. They are playing inside of the sigil. So talk about like sigil magic and it right kind of thing. And it's so storied, like the Arthur Ashe's story, like the story about Arthur Ashe and all of this kind of. There's so much wrapped into that. And then within that temple of Chase, that Chase, temple, then you have all of these other symbols of different companies, right? Like adorning the wall. So it's almost like when you go to the Masonic Lodge and you see like all the companies that they make donations to, it's like a reverse thing like that,
Yeah,
right? So one year I was watching and like they were zooming in from like the way up above, right? And like as I was like the way up above, they're getting closer, and like the whole court didn't look real to me. It looked like a video game, right? Or like a simulation, and it went all the way down, 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 and not until it like literally hit the ground did the players or anything even look like real people, right? And I was like, wow, man, this is like some sort of really interesting. Like I wonder if somebody's experiencing this almost as a video game. Are there like snuff video games where people can kind of tap in and play the characters? And I've gone on to this now. Like I know that a lot of top tennis players are gamers, and I've had some very strange experiences where like I'll be at a party and I will see what like people that look like either they are the tennis player or they look exactly like the tennis player, right? And sometimes it's even happening simultaneous to when I know the tennis player should be somewhere else. Like I know they should be on court at the final at the Australian Open and not at a party at Eternal in Austin. But that club Eternal, I've had a number of weird experiences. They just changed names. It's not called that anymore. I think it's like a gaming environment or like a green screen environment because it's one of the places where like when I'm there, sometimes I can't see this part of people's face. It's almost like they have a mask on and like some of their clothes like blend into the background and some don't. Like some people look normal to me and some people look like they're not really there. Like they're like being, like a hologram into it on something, right? Had some of the weirdest I've been to thousands of parties in New York City, Los Angeles, here, like Skid Row in Los Angeles. This is just a club in downtown Austin, but it's like one of the weirdest little dungeons I've ever been to. And whenever I go there, I get this sense that it's like a gaming environment that people can tap into through role-playing games or Second Life type of things. And I know Daniil Medvedev is like a high-level gamer. He's even sponsored by some of the gaming companies, right? So I've had a lot of those experiences, and whether they're just my mind blending the two worlds or whether there's some degree of truth to them, I'm open to either possibility. I'm not saying that my delusion is everyone else's lived reality or whatever it is. But so like that was the first time I started to think about it, and that was like probably like maybe 2017, 2018 that I had that experience. And then I have talked a lot about like when somebody hits like a fucking wicked forehand, like that fucking forehand that like Del Potro hit at the 2009 US Open, that was like a literal laser beam. Like I think that that velocity escapes our normal understanding of like space and time or this domain. And for like a second, like the balls, like people who like caught that in person are like outside of time for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've even said this, like there are certain um, gymnasts who do skills in a way where like they stop time for a second. This is kind of like exceeding the speed of time. It's a little bit opposite, right? And I've talked on shows about how the royalty always sit like right center court, kind of down low, and they're watching at the height of the tennis ball. And I've wondered if when the tennis ball hits a certain velocity, if it like almost opens up like a rift and they can see through to like another dimension or outside of the time stream. And then fucking literally 6 months after I said that, Amex came out with a commercial that showed exactly what I was talking about.
Shit.
Right. Right. And so like that, it was literally, it was kind of like in like a humorous cartoon kind of form, but they were showing like the royalty box watching the ball go back and forth, and then suddenly something popped open and then closed again. So right, so either they're like, oh, that chick has good ideas, let's do that, or I'm onto something. And I think it's probably maybe somewhere in between the two. So that, and then another one was like, I haven't seen these Adidas commercials in the last couple of years, but for a while they were having shoe styles that were named after like Alexander the Great and Hannibal and stuff like that, right? And they would have these commercials and they would only play them once. It would be on like in the first like couple days of the US Open. They would play it one time, and it was like almost like an artistic piece. Like, did you see the promo for the 16 Slam?
Yeah.
Right, it was like not that long, but something kind of like that, where there was like all of this historical and esoteric symbolism around these characters, and it was for like a shoe, right? And I was like, they know that these archetypes that get their own shoe lines and or that are the first person to wear that shoe, that like they're carrying some of that energy, whether they're they're giving them that shoe because that tennis player reminds them of that god, or whether they're trying to imbue that tennis player with the characteristics of that god or that character, whatever it is. Like it's definitely we will look back. It wouldn't surprise me if 2,000 years from now, the same way we know about the stories of like Zeus and all the people from like the Iliad and the Odyssey, or from the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, like if the way people talk about Nadal and Djokovic and whatever is more like that than it is just like, oh yeah, like this person won this match, they won the Olympics. Like those rivalries are almost like these tensions between civilizations or countries or whatever it is, right? If you look at the passion of people who either hate Djokovic or love Djokovic, or hate it's starting to develop with the Sinner Alcaraz thing. It's nowhere near that level yet, right? And just like the absolute.
You mentioned last time about Roger and your gripe with his fans, just that, even though he didn't represent that, the love was so intense, and then the disgust for other people who would dare rival him is
right.
It's quite a capture. It's quite a possession for that level of fandom. Teams are one thing. I'm starting to give more of a wide berth to teams. I don't think it's quite cultish the way people are about the Eagles or the Chiefs or whatever. But if you can fixate on one person battling out there,
it's religious in nature.
Yes.
Like, did you ever read like David Foster Wallace's article about Roger Federer?
Absolutely. Yes.
Or have you ever seen, like, Robert and I did a show about Roger Federer and Bill Gates back in the day, right?
Which I've tried to find, Emily. The only one I saw from a show back in the day was Serena.
I'll find you. I'll see if I can
Thanks.
find it.
I'd love to
Like,
link it and again expand the portal for people.
I literally think that like Bill Gates has almost like this like idolatry kind of obsession with Roger Federer that borders on being in love with or some sort of like weird demented kind of thing. Um, that is like not like forget about whatever we all think about Bill Gates, right? If we just look at the dynamic between these two, there was something more. Like it was like an obsession, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I certainly understand some of that. Like, right? Like
Sure.
I was pretty big Nadal fan, right? And I still have a lot of respect for him on the court, right? And who he is as I have, well, probably always for me, but as I have come to know and accept myself more as I've gotten older, like he's just like he's he's about like obedience to authority, and Djokovic is about being his own man, right? And I have like for me being my own person, right? Like I don't have like disdain for tradition, although I do have disdain for authority that I don't think is earned. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
disdain for tradition, and I don't think Djokovic does either. But like
Yeah,
I
they're different.
really have respect for someone who's like, I'm going to stand out here by myself, regardless of what anybody thinks of that. And I'm going to like deliver the goods, regardless of what anybody thinks of me. And like over time, like I didn't, I never hated Djokovic, but like I wasn't as enthralled with his play style until the last like maybe 5 or 6 years. I've maybe a little longer than that, maybe about 2017 or 18, I really started to love it, even though I respected it before. But just to watch the way he deals with adversity and the way he deals with being the odd man out, like, I mean, I think it's just like, for me, I like that more. But I used to love watching Nadal. Like, I really get into it. Like, I was really rooting hard, right?
Yeah.
So I get it on some level. But the thing with Bill Gates is weird. I'll find you the episode. You guys can link it. It's a public episode, so you can like
Okay.
the show notes or something. Yeah.
Thank you. That would be great. Yeah, with it never escapes me to acknowledge the inspiration that comes from those three very different examples because I'm learning more stories about Roger and especially his upbringing and having especially a South African mother
Mm-hmm.
and the discipline and the accountability. And I mean, I think Roger may find himself sort of between those diametrically opposed figures of Rafa and Novak because I mean, certainly a lot of tradition. You're the Europe, Swiss. Oh gosh, I mean, with Switzerland, the things I've learned about red and white crosses, and Steve Falconer has done great work on that. And I started to think, the role of that Roger played. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but, because you're steeped in more of that lore than I am. Him being such an iconic sportsman for so long, and although Switzerland hasn't played, I mean, they don't, right? They don't play a front stage role, and yet, I mean, how can anyone be neutral? How can anyone be so financially independent? How can anyone be this landing ground for so many international disputes? And I mean, any thoughts on that,
Well,
Emily? That
can you
you've
tell me what Steve Falconer says about the red and white crosses?
and just tying in the history of Swiss Templars, of course, how it came to be that. I mean, I think I forget if the headquarters for the WHO is there, but there is a health governing body that is established there. Davos convenes there, I believe, at least once a year. Uh, but yeah, I'd have to scour my
Okay.
notes on
I
that.
didn't know if
But
there was something specific. Yeah. So okay, things that yeah, that are sort of accepted. Well, I mean, I see Switzerland like, we think of the United States as being the military force of the world. We think of the city of London as controlling the finances of the world. We think of the Vatican as being in control of like the religion or that kind of thing. But Switzerland is the controlling the domain of time, right? Like Swiss watches,
yeah,
right? also the temporal, which is why the Templars, right? The temporal sort of mystique of Switzerland is like no joke. But also, if you start looking into lots of things about Roger Federer, even though he was, he was born in South Africa, right? I
Yep.
believe he born in South Africa. Yeah. There's almost no story of like intelligence or mind control that doesn't have a thread that connects somehow to South Africa, first of all,
Yep.
right? And
He was born in Basel. He was born in Basel.
he was born in
But
Basel. Mom
yep.
is from South Africa.
Oh
So
yes.
Basel.
His parents met in South Africa. His dad was an engineer traveling there, and they met there.
Okay. So Basel is where Hermann Hesse, who wrote the book The Glass Bead Game, is from, right? And also where I think Albert Hoffman, who was the first to synthesize LSD, is from, right? There's just an endless number of things that connect to a deeper understanding of the way this realm actually works that are anchored not just in Switzerland, but in Basel, right?
Yes.
And I see tennis as being the highest expression on some level of the sacred geometry of space, time, and sound when it comes to sports, right? And that's really what's being played with. I think that's really how sort of simulations, holograms, shared understandings of created realities are formed, right? I think that is some of the highest principles of those secret societies, is to understand how to create reality. You have to understand the sacred geometry of space, time, and sound, and then use light as your tool to bring that into to vision, to eyesight, right? So he's definitely would be, if you pay attention to the characters in the Glass Bead Game, right? Joseph Knecht and some of the other students at Castalia, like you can very easily see Roger Federer being that style of prodigy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a titillating parallel right there. I'll have to dive into that. It's in my bookshelf. I haven't read it, but I've heard people reference it before. And yeah, I mean, to come full circle on things like that, I mean, he is mythical. I agree with you wholeheartedly that I don't even know if it will take 2,000 years, because even the way that I speak about
Mm-hmm.
the mythical impact of, and this is where we can continue weaving this stuff. I mean, I'm just loving this, Emily. This fills my cup in a major potent way. The match between Carlos and Novak was, I agree with Novak, and I, as much as I support him, again, more as a student than as a fanatic. I'm not fanatic about anything anymore. I am deeply curious and still resonate with the passion, and I am inspired by that physical effort and the mental and emotional and spiritual effort. I am more than fine with him winning that match and basically saying that felt like a final. Whatever I do for me, I mean, of course he was banged up, and I mean that hamstring groin area was eviscerated. And I mean, did you see the drama of Alcaraz in between the third
Yeah.
and fourth set going to his bench hobbling? I think he probably had just like some consternation. I don't think he was mocking Novak or anything like that. The tennis world loves to drum up shit where there's not, and yet there's plenty of drama to it doesn't fluctuate, it's always there. But those duels and those burgeoning rivalries, I mean, for Novak to even hang in there,
I
go
think if
for
we're
it.
honest with ourselves, like, of course, the way that we keep track for history is by counting Grand Slam titles and year-end number ones and week
Yeah.
one and titles won. But if we really think about like it's specific matches that are epic, right? And so, like I will never forget that 2008 Nadal Federer match at Wimbledon, where like it was starting to mist and it literally looked like gold was dropping out of the sky. Like it looked like there was gold dust, right, dropping out of the sky, and there kept being rain delays and it was getting dark, and like that was like mythical, right? And some of the battles between, Djokovic and Nadal, or even Djokovic and Murray sometimes, right?
Yeah.
They just were these knockdown, drag out, like kind of things. It's specific matches I've never, with the possible exception of like this Madison Keys run where like 5 of her 7 matches were like pretty
Yes.
epic, right? Like she had the number of like really good players she had to go to get that. I think that might be one of the greatest runs ever.
Oh, almost without comparison on the women's side. Rybakina, major champion. Svitolina, a cultural darling at the moment.
Right.
Iga, Sabalenka, line them up, knock them down. I mean, it doesn't get much deeper than that. And it's a 14 or 15 match win streak going back to her win in Auckland. So
That rarely happens at majors. Generally, at
right,
majors, what you get for most of the, like, for especially when people are on like runs, like Roger Federer's run in like the mid 2000s, or some of Djokovic's runs, or what's a little bit of what Sinner's is going on right now. You may have one match like earlier mid tournament where you get tested, right? And then like maybe a tough semifinal or a tough final. But a lot of times, like the final or the semis are straight sets, and it's like it's not really challenging. It's just you won the title, but there wasn't this like amazing battle, right? It was more just this like test of being able to manage all of the stuff for 2 weeks. Maybe this is where Djokovic is actually content going forward. Like I do think he'll win another slam, maybe 2, but I don't think, I think he wants to play for a couple more years. And I think he just wants to give the beat down to Carlos and Jannik Sinner the
yeah,
most amount of times he can. I don't think he cares if he wins the tournament or not at this point. I think he would prefer to,
yeah,
right? But as so long as he, on a regular basis, teaches those boys a lesson, like he's going to feel like he is still the undisputed warrior, like the person that you put your money on, one battle for your life, who you going to pick, right? For effort, it was always Nadal, but for mental, it was always Djokovic. And now at this later stage of his career, right, the amount of effort that you see him putting into every point, right, because he doesn't want to let one go by, right,
yeah,
is kind of a combination of those things. And so I think we may see a scenario where he becomes more focused on how many times he can beat Carlos and Yannick than how many more Grand Slams he can win,
yeah.
right? And that,
Which is an elite level warrior mentality. Is I care much more about this,
yeah.
this dynamic then, because yeah, in every conceivable metric for the most part that you said. And I was thinking of you the other day, Emily, when you were talking about how we account for history and time as well. I mean, you've certainly encouraged me to think differently in many respects, but with time I was just thinking, as with the concerted effort I'm making to tune into the seasons,
Mm-hmm.
and of course through astrology, but also the significant times of the year, uh it is cyclical,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we count time in a linear fashion to our complete detriment.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I tie that into, despite how long and linear the tennis calendar seems, these cycles that come up, these rotations that come up, are so compelling. And of course, yeah, I mean the arc of almost everyone's career, worth mentioning has. I mean, I've got this great Bjorn Borg book next to me. Hit fascinating sprint of time, and then PBS did a great breakdown. I don't know if you saw, of a lot of the kind of 20th century champions from like the 60s on, and just talked about their different runs of longevity. You got people like Jimmy Connors, who played near 20 years, and Roger. And yeah, I mean, I think Novak definitely has a different relationship with time, and to the point where the Olympic final where he beat Carlos in the 2 tie breaks. And I mean, I keep seeing highlights pop up on that, on my tennis feed, and the balls that he hit past Carlos on that heavy clay, with a heavy ball late in the set, especially late in the tie break.
Some of those cross court backhands were like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Uh,
again, I mean, there's so many great details and dynamics to cover here, and we can.
One thing I want to say about time real fast
Go,
before we
please, please.
get back. no other sport has so much focus on watch sponsors, right? Like the
Yeah.
Rolex and Richard, I can't say it, it's something with an M, and
Richard Millet, yeah.
Malay
Oui. Oui.
and Hublot and all, like they're all a lot, they're all sponsored. All the top players are sponsored by watches. And go check out, like, Michael and I did a bunch of episodes of Project Kids or Glass Bead Game about like Rolex and the athletes they sponsor and whatnot. Roger Federer is definitely in this relationship with time, like that commercial where he's walking through the Tennis Hall of Fame and he's like, we don't just record time, we create it, or something like
Yeah.
that, right? So there, if you look at like Djokovic's watch, his new Hublot is made of his rackets, and there's pieces of his racket and shoes and clothes that he's worn in it. So it's like the fabric of time, right?
Yeah.
Like they understand, and you don't see this. Like I've never heard of a gymnast that has a watch sponsor, even though the routines are timed. There's no, like, the time has only been introduced to tennis as it keeps track how long the match is going, but there's no
Mhm.
time when the match is over. It's not like you're waiting for it to run out. There's no, the only way that there's any time thing is now they're time between points. They're giving you like a 20-second limit between
Yeah.
points and whatnot. But like otherwise, with this, what is the obsession between time and tennis, other than there's some understanding of tennis as a sport that has the ability to transcend time, to get us outside of time, to, like, to sort of for moments or for lifetimes take us outside of the time stream into what Amon Hillman calls the ionic life, right? And I think that, like, they find people, they become very focused on these people who are able to transcend time, not just in terms of length of career, but even in terms of like, well, wait a second, how did you just do that? How did you get, I didn't see you move from here to there, you were here and now you're there, like,
Yeah.
right? So all sorts of ways you can play with time.
Absolutely, and it's said that at the highest level of tennis and higher as you go up the rungs, that and I believe this is the case in a lot of sports, anticipation, that ability to see through just that moment, and I mean, you can call it instinct. I mean, with someone like Novak and, I mean, there's still some wily I mean, I think Sinner is displaying a bit of this, Carlos less so, interestingly enough, but, it's like, if the ball is going to be coming to you at 90, if you're just split stepping when they hit it and not anticipating, I mean, you see sometimes they split and you just watch it go by you and you clap for them and go on, but the level of anticipation, thankfully, I think it is because, and I don't like the serve clock at all. I mean, there's so many things I don't like that they're changing. I don't like coaching. I appreciate it for Sola, and I get it. They fucking did it with hand signals and sly words, and so what? Uh, again, to be so intensely isolated out there,
Yep.
to be in the
Part of it.
confines.
It's
Oh,
part. Yep.
absolutely, and I think it's better that way. And of course, I enjoyed the dynamics with Novak and Andy and that emotional moment shared with, again, just the significance of winning that match against Alcaraz, on, one and a half legs was massive, and to have Andy there. Did you ever see the Andy Murray documentary on Amazon,
Yes.
Resurfaced?
Yes.
Yeah, I share it with people all the time because, I mean, he's just a card, Scottish stoic brute. I find him hilarious, and just a fascinating story. Which, do you know a good bit about his biography and
Oh
like?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I've a
Okay.
lot about him over the years, and like I have equal amounts of respect and disdain for him on some levels,
Yeah.
right? And like, I have him in like a less significant way paired with Jeff Bezos as like the big four with the different,
Oh,
because during the course of their career, like those were some of the big four like tech magnates, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think Andy Murray is, I mean, he's super interesting. Like I did, he was at that first school shooting, right?
Yeah.
That
Is
pre,
it is that true, like, the Western world's first?
like the first one that had certainly amount of like propaganda and the
Okay.
flavor of there's something not quite right about this.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what you've heard me make up about Andy Murray, but he was there,
Yeah.
and like I have a sense, and I'm not saying that I'm correct. It's just like one of the things that like I see when I look out of the corner of my eye. We see an awful lot of his mother, but we don't see too much of his father, right?
Almost never.
If you just look at Andy Murray's profile and his hairline, it looks a lot like King Charles. And Diana was rumored to have had an affair with her tennis coach. I wonder if King Charles ever had an affair with his tennis coach. Right? And like when Andy Murray won the US Open, he was knighted at the hotel in Scotland where he, I think his wedding or so, he was knighted. He also, I think, got married or something at the place where the Templars came into being in Scotland.
Oh man.
Right. And I have always felt like he's always kind of inserted himself into like the sort of cultural and political issues of the day at certain levels. Like he was one of the first men to have a woman tennis coach when he hired Emily Moyer. He's spoken out about a lot of those like equality and fairness issues. He certainly had a lot to say about COVID and he's definitely very intelligent. I disagree with him on a lot of things, but he's not just like speaking out his ass or whatever it is. But I always felt like if Scotland ever declares independence, is ever able to move that across the goal line, right, then somehow he would rise to power in Scotland and keep it in the family. You guys can go and find me talking about that in the one
I will.
I ever did with Tracy Twyman.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, like right. So
that's brilliant. Yeah, I mean he's I'm just playing with that live here because I mean he's.
This is for entertainment purposes, guys.
Of course, and you are absolutely dead balls accurate as an industry term to nail that for sure. No, I mean they're great characters, and again at your thanks to your nudge in that direction of thinking of them more on the stage and this timeless stage. I mean, to say another word on time, I always enjoyed that. And going into tennis history, I discovered that they up until the 50s, I mean certainly for most of Rod Laver's career, which had two phases because it was the time when certainly there was an amateur status. You couldn't play in the major tournaments. They went what was called barnstorming. They'd go to places. I mean, even someone as successful as him would travel in a van with Guillermo Villas and young Jimmy Connors and or young, and then when Laver got older they were many years apart, but across America and go play in Wichita Falls and then New York City and then Los Angeles and then Houston. And
it was more like a musical tour back then with like traveling around in the bus than it is this like jet set thing. Yeah.
And I've had just glimpses, and this Bjorn Borg and the Super Swedes I think will give more looks into an international locker room, and at a time when I mean of course in those travel days it was much more I mean driving was the thing even for professionals, but to say a word on time, it was only in the I'm going to take a flyer on myself and say in the 60s that they introduced the tiebreak. And that was to make it more TV friendly. And of course, the game style, I mean, thankfully, the perspective on how much tennis is changing, not necessarily for the better, for those of us who have been watching for a while, things like that. Okay, tiebreaker, great. It does, keep things moving. But the people who talk about how the surfaces change the ball, for as powerful as the rackets and the strings are, for as powerful as these athletes are, the game is slower in a lot of ways, and you can have, I mean, for hard court and clay court alike, there's so much parity, and this is the thing that I don't enjoy anyway is parity. And I mean, I have a podcast coming up with someone who is deeply involved in junior tennis development, developing college and pro level athletes here in the States as well. He's out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I mean, they talk about just how that doesn't incentivize good tennis because, for instance, one of the things I picked up from the Spanish system is that growing up on clay, which I was blessed enough to do, red clay, slow in the humidity of Cape Cod in the summertime, where when I would slice it, the kids would say, "Tom's cheating. Did you see how that belt? Tom's cheating." I'm like, it's just a slice you nitwit, but the Spanish system encourages, which we definitely don't have in the States anymore, grit doesn't quite do it justice. It is discipline through point building,
Yep.
through endurance, through suffering. And it was a point made recently. Actually, Gil had a great, actually, the author of this book, who was his coach growing up, Chris Lewitt, who's now based in Vermont and services sort of New York and New England, USTA development, pointed out that Sinner is more of a Spanish player than Alcaraz is, because Alcaraz is fairly undisciplined. Will run and gun and, hit it off the back wall, if he's hitting out. Sinner has more of that Djokovic germ in him, that seed actually, to I'm going to stay in it. It's going to be a heavy ball, but I'm in it. I'm going to get there. I'm going to give you something with depth. I don't have to hit way out on it. And because, his coaches were greatly influenced by, and the Italians in general are playing more like that. Someone like Matteo Arnaldi is going to play more like that. Caboli is a little, he's kind of all over the place, but that's what I appreciate about Europeans in general. Roger grew up on clay, Novak grew up on clay, is that unlike the impatient Americans, they are willing to endure. The mentality is, I will stay out here all day. I don't care if you make every return back. I'm going to stay in it. I'm not counting on a serve plus one. Serve plus one is one of the most, just asinine things that every broadcaster harps on, that I really resent in a way, because it doesn't take in tactics and the arc of tennis, where, of course, like we were saying, with racket technology, with balls, with high variability on the surfaces, and inspiration, like for someone like Bjorn Borg, who won multiple Wimbledons and multiple Roland Garros titles, is that you have to, this is something I learned from Roger, is that Roger, his mentality growing up was, I need to be able to hit every shot from every part of the court on every surface. Period. That's how you become great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think definitely both Novak and Rafael Nadal exemplified that style of play of like, I don't care if it's a 40-stroke rally, a 50-stroke rally, I'm not going to miss. Each ball is going to get slightly heavier, a little bit more, right? Or whatever it is. But it is, you're right. Sinner is displaying more of that style of discipline, though he has more linear power than most of those Spanish or Italian type of players have had.
Yeah.
The Carlos thing is kind of fascinating to watch, sort of what is happening with him.
Yeah.
But I think this was to be expected. He achieved so much so quickly, right? And he's still pretty immature, right? And he's so talented, and also he definitely has a different relationship with time, like his ability to move very, very quickly and to accelerate. Like once you feel that feeling, you want to feel it all the time. And that's like great for some things, but not necessarily for what he's trying to do with it right now. And I see inside of him like a thing that, like, maybe I was like this when I was little, and it causes you to become careless. Is like, once you beat someone once, you think you're better than them and that you're always gonna beat them, right? He's not used to this like push and pull, and this like I taught you and then you taught me. He has so far accelerated past all of his peers throughout his development, right? That he is a little bit confused, I think, by what is happening right now. And like once he comes to understand that, like, oh, every time I beat someone, they're gonna change their tactics to beat me. So like it not only is not the same thing gonna work, like nothing like that is gonna work. Like Djokovic will show up with a completely different game style to counteract what I did to him last time. And like I have one set to adjust to his new style, and if I can't do it, he's gonna run away with it. And this is going to be, this is where maturity is going to come into play. Also, I've noticed that Juan Carlos is talking to him a lot less during the match, which I think is ultimately good for Carlos. I think if Carlos came in on his own, like to me, it cheapened a little bit some of his wins, the amount of chatter that was going on between him and Juan Carlos. I felt like, what are we watching here? If you have to be told what to do every point, now, sure.
Yeah,
like
father, son.
You have to be able to execute what someone's telling you to do, and that takes talent. but that is different than like problem solving during a match by yourself, which is part of what I think should be about.
Mhm.
So I think him going through this phase where maybe he's going to go on a drought because Juan Carlos is going to, whether it was at Carlos's request or Juan Carlos's decision, he's going to have to figure out what to do in situations and make quicker adjustments and be willing to like lose a battle in order to win the war kind of thing, instead of like wanting to, you know, win every point, every whatever it is. He has to start to engage more psychology and tactics in his game. I think there might be a drought for him this year. I think it's possible that he doesn't get one this year. And then a year or 2 years or 3 years from now, he goes on that run that everyone was expecting he might have gone on last year or this year or whatever it is. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting to your point. It is interesting to see him display more of a Francis Tiafoe style of like mentality in the matches than a Nadal style of mentality.
Yeah. And Sinner, meanwhile, is becoming more stoic. I mean, I remember just a couple of years ago, he'd be quite chatty with his box. I mean, even when Darren Cahill first came on the team. And I mean, just on a personal preference level, one of the things I appreciate about Sinner is that containment. Of course, everyone has their different outlets, and yet I think of the energy conservation required to. So I've only cramped once, and it was last summer in like mid-July. I played 5 matches in 2 days. 5 best of 3 full matches, and like by the final, started warming up. I was like, my inner quads, I'm like, there are gonna be some quicker points here. But my friends who have played, and I never played tennis year round. I never played the circuit. I just played summertime, and only these last couple of years have I been playing year round, doubles indoors this time of year. My friends who played at a high level all said that like the nerve cramping is a really big deal. Is like for someone as fit and no doubt has some level. I mean, I'm sure as they grow, I mean, they are so young, they will still have to adjust their nutrition and their relationship with energy. And yet, I think of just how keyed up someone like a Carlos is. I can absolutely see now just the leakage, the energy leakage that comes with from, Emily. Sometimes the third point, he's looking at Juan Carlos with a fist pump and I'm like, wow, I get it. You're intense. But, when I watch Sampras and I watch Agassi and I watch even, Pat Rafter, who I love watching highlights of, like, for as intense as those guys were, they're not fist pumping when they hold to go up 2-1 in the first set. Yeah, I mean, you've been watching tennis. Like, what do you make of that? Of just how emotive the players have become from, again,
I think
early on in the
it's weird
match.
when they do it every point. I've always thought that was weird. The players that do
Yeah.
it like every time they win a point. Like
Yeah.
for me, my favorite was always when like sometimes it took 2 hours, but generally it was more like 45 minutes, like when you got down to the brass tacks of the first set, especially if it went to a tiebreaker, when we finally got the triple fist pump from Nadal
Yeah.
or whatever it is, or the first time we got the from Djokovic or whatever.
Yeah.
Like there was this anticipation and waiting. When is it going to happen? And to your point, yes, I think part of the reason I think that Carlos does it is with them, it was more about like, I'm taking control of this match. With him, it's more like, I just did a good trick. Like I just did one of those things that like is a magic trick or that like looked really amazing. I think he's like a circus performer and he wants to be rewarded for the oohs and ahs. And right. So I think he has a different goal. It's closer in line to Francis Tiafoe in terms of like wanting that sort of like stardom moment, like the shot making or whatever. So I think that's what it is. I don't think it really is that he thinks like, yes, I won this point, I'm going to win the match. I think it's like, damn, that was fucking special, right?
Yeah.
So these are the things. I think it's like, Gael Monfils was a person like that. We didn't see him go very far. Now, Carlos is different than Gael Monfils. I mean, he's having his best year right now, Gael Monfils. It's amazing, right? But I think he's going to have to grow up and learn to manage all of this. But there's some players, there's gymnasts like this too. There's gymnasts that like never go on a run. They never win the big titles, or maybe they won one of them, but everyone remembers their spectacular moments even more than the people who won a lot. And some athletes are like that. Some athletes are able to put it together and be both, at least for a while or whatever it is. So it's going to be really interesting to watch him develop and see which style of play keeps him interested. Is it winning all the tournaments that makes him excited about tennis, or is it pulling off like these like incredible feats of like covering the entire court in like a millisecond, or penetrating the speed of light with a forehand? Like, he may be more satisfied by that. And so it's going to be interesting to watch how that develops. But I agree with you. Learning to manage your energy, learning to manage, like your body and your hydration and your food and your fitness and all of that. Like, it's part of it. Now, Sinner is just a more contained, mature person. Personally, so this is what I have to say about Sinner. A couple of years ago, like, I didn't like Sinner really at all. I thought he was like choked all the time, ran out of energy in matches, was boring to watch. Like, to me, he wasn't that different than Rublev. He was just like a better Rublev, right? Like, I didn't think he'd ever really do anything. And then he made some changes and he's done so. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Sinner, but I don't find him engaging to watch. Like, I'm fearing that we may be going into a period of Sinner rule, which is not going to be very interesting. I don't sort of have the disdain for that I have for the idea of Iga rule, right? Because I don't find him to be a distasteful character. He seems to enjoy tennis. He seems to work hard and put in the commitment, and he seems to be like I think he's a good person, a good kid, and I think he deserves to be winning, right? Like, he's very good.
Just quickly, Emily, did you enjoy the Sampras reign?
I can't say that I was watching a ton of tennis during the high point of Sampras's reign. So, like, at the end where it wasn't so easy for him, I appreciated it. Like, I like watching the old guys struggle and overcome. That's like one of my favorite things, is like that kind of, so I enjoyed some of that, towards the end, but I wasn't in a huge period of watching men's tennis, like at the height of his reign. But I like grass court tennis. I grass court.
The old grass court tennis.
Right. Grass is my favorite surface to watch. And so, like, I found, people who were good on grass to be entertaining tennis players. But I've just kind of like, I'm neutral on Sampras, but yes, I see that personality wise, they're more similar, Sinner and Sampras. So it's just, it's an interesting time. I don't know. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the WADA, the doping thing and whatever it is. Right. Like, I have mixed feel. I believe him. Right. I believe him. I don't think he was consciously cheating or anything like that. I also feel like, okay, well, but still that happened. And there was, there should be some consequence. Maybe what he's had to suffer already is enough. But if he does get suspended for a length of time, then I think it will create maybe a more interesting period of time than if he doesn't get suspended, but because it will create more jockeying for winning titles and things like that. And then when he comes back, he's going to have to overcome that. Now, that doesn't mean that that's a reason that that should happen. But I do see, like, if he doesn't get suspended, we may be going through a period of time that was kind of like Federer's reign, where it was just like, we already know Federer is going to win. So it's like the competitions are happening earlier in the tournament and not later, which to me was kind of boring at a certain point. Right. But yeah, so that.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, you're speaking to, we never want it to be boring. And there is again, the parity is frustrating. Like, there are no grass court specialists. There's no one who can really execute on when a quicker game is encouraged.
Nick Kyrgios is a grass court specialist.
Yes, yes. I mean, that was a well-deserved run in 22 to the final. You know, would have been great to watch him duke it out with Rafa.
Right.
The way he played in that first set against Novak, if he played like that for at least 3 or more sets against Rafa, probably would have got the job done because he does have that full toolkit. Again, I mean, to level everything out, to make things more even or easier does not make it better. I mean, that was something I was thinking of with Dave Anderson, who I'll be interviewing, who's deeply involved in tennis development, is he says that, especially in the States, like, I don't know if you know this, but I think I have, yeah. So this is what's called a green ball. And they teach for little kids, there are progressions called red ball, orange ball, green ball. I assure you that Novak Djokovic, Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, Andy Murray, any European, basically anywhere from any player from anywhere else in the world only played with a fucking yellow tennis ball. And here in the States, so these are very, very soft. The red balls are basically toy balls, and the orange ones are somewhere in between. But this is the mentality of, well, we just want people playing. We just want things to be easier. Doesn't make it better. I mean, there's rarely an example I can think of where if you make things easier, you make it better. Now in the gym, when I coach people, or if someone is seeking out my guidance in holistic health, when we say holistic, it can contain everything. It's like capital E environment. It can absolutely contain everything, and that can get complex. We can simplify it. And so being a student of Paul Chek, I couch it in 4-doctor system: Dr. Quiet, Dr. Diet, Dr. Movement, Dr. Happiness. Whatever relationship people have with those 4, that makes it simpler, and then they can go from there. But in the tennis world, I mean, again, to have parity, like, okay, now everyone can coach. Your coaches can be right beside you. It can be that. I mean, what came to mind when you were talking about Carlos and Juan Carlo is like daddy and son. Sort of that dynamic. And with other coaching relationships, it's way different. And speaking of coaching relationships, I would love to go here. Madison Keys coached successfully by her husband. Can you think of first? Let's start with a not so rhetorical question. Could you imagine? Let's see. Mirka would have been fascinating, but you understand masculine, feminine energy, not just male, female dynamics. Could you imagine a wife coaching her husband on the ATP tour?
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't know. I think there's a couple of things going on here right. I think Madison Keys on every level is a pretty unique individual. So just fun fact. Laura did apply for the job of Madison Keys. My girlfriend did apply for the job of Madison Keys physical therapist before she, like, at the time she hired the one she has now, right? So yeah. Fun fact. But wow. Madison Keys is really quite a unique player on some levels. She exemplifies some of the issues with American tennis, sometimes like lack of discipline and point building and keeping the ball in the lines, lots of power, big forehand, big serve and whatever it is. Right. Maybe like not as, put together in terms of like mentality at an early age or whatever it is, but undeniably like more powerful than some of the men. Like she hits forehands at a faster pace than a good portion of the men. So she is an interesting balance of masculine and of the male masculine feminine dynamic within herself, right? She has sort of the power of a male tennis player, but maybe a little bit less of the ability to compartmentalize than men are generally known for. And it's been something she's had to really, really work on and learn. And she's had to overcome the fear of like, well, I'm so powerful and I'm so good at so many things, but if I make changes in order to try and get over that last little bit of hump, will that screw things up and whatever it is. And I think in her particular, she has a legendary relationship with Lindsay Davenport, who was also a pure striker of the ball and powerful and whatever it is. But, no one's ever been able to quite unlock it all the way. And I think for her, two things. I think Bjorn Fratangelo is also a unique character. He's a little bit, and I don't mean this in an offensive way. He's a little bit of has some developed feminine qualities. He's not as powerful. So like she's the powerhouse in the relationship, and he's a little bit more slight of build and whatever it is. He's a little bit quieter and more like somewhat reserved, not super emotional. But I think for her, she had to know that the person who was telling her to change her game she had to trust them, and she fully trusts him. That's obvious, right? Because if we're going to do this and it fucks everything else up, you're going to be stuck in this with me, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it had to come to him, and he had figured out from being in a long relationship with her, like how she responds to being talked to in different ways and whatnot, and he doesn't want anything from her that he doesn't already have, and blah 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 blah. So I think actually for her it was the solution, right? Because she kind of tried all the other dynamics out, and now he may not have been useful like earlier on in her career. If the same thing had happened 10 years prior, no, it probably would have been a mess. But at this time, in this way, with his tennis career ending in the way it did, in the timing where she was starting to have a little bit of a resurgence, but it wasn't quite there yet and whatnot. I think it just was a timing thing. Did you hear the interview with them on Served?
Oh no.
So this week's episode of Served, which is Andy Roddick's podcast, has both of them. But the more interesting interview was definitely with him, because I already know these things about Madison Keys, but we don't know too much about Bjorn Fratangelo.
Yeah, to Madison's credit, throughout the tournament and in general, I admire her articulation of what she's experiencing, and I mean, few people have that ability. It's always remarkable when people who don't speak English can do that. That's why Medvedev is really, I think, masterful at that. Live, fresh off the court, can talk about things that he is feeling and articulate it really well. But for anyone to do that, I mean, we're doing our best to do it live. It doesn't always come natural. You've had lots of reps, but so yeah, I'd be keen to hear from him. So yeah, what highlights stood out to you from that?
To them talk, and like how they got to this point, like what the experience was like in it, and like what the plan is sort of going forward. And like I agree with him. Like I think she could go on a run here. Like when I say that, I don't mean that, she's going to win everything this year. But what I mean is I think she can bust out a few late career Grand Slam titles. I don't think this is going to be the only one, right? And I think that the small changes that have been made to the game, and he already, while she was winning this title and going through that list of characters, he was already seeing things she can do to improve from that, right? And that's already where his mind is at. And he's like, but my goal for her is not to win another slam. My goal for her is to play a forehand dropper at 4-3, right, down game point, in the second set of a match against whatever, right? Introduce a level of variety that no one is expecting, right? And so, so I think this is going to be interesting to watch over the next couple of years to see what happens here. I think this came at just the right time. She's 29. So like she can, for a couple more years, like really go for it before it's like, okay, if I want to have a family, I need to do it now, or like my body is too damaged or whatever. So it's going to be really interesting to see. And if this is the only one she ever does, it was probably the greatest tournament run in women's tennis history, right? She hit some of the biggest forehands probably ever clocked by a female and whatever. Yep. And if we see something really interesting here, I think it's going to give a lot of hope to a lot of players who thought maybe their time had passed, and, knowing that like be open to change and it can happen. Right.
Absolutely, and I don't think that's an overstatement at all. How monumental her run was, because it's about steep competition as you can get. Because she was outside, she was the 20-something seed, maybe the 19th seed, something like that. So to come up against Rybakina, somewhere around there, somewhere hovering around
Iga, Svitolina, Sabalenka.
Yeah,
I think there was one. What's his name? the guy from Argentina. What was his name? Hold on
Del
a second.
Potro? No,
No, no, the guy before that, blonde guy, kind of long hair, a little chubby.
Nalbandian. David
Nalbandian. Yeah,
Nalbandian.
Keith Nalbandian, right? I think he had a Masters 1000 tournament where he beat Federer,
All
Nadal,
three, yeah.
and Davydenko all in a row to win, right?
Yep.
So like, but that wasn't at a Grand Slam, right? So that's the
Yeah.
only one I can think of that is equivalent. And had Djokovic not hurt himself and been able to continue and won this tournament, that you could say that having to go through Alcaraz, Zverev, and Sinner would have been equal as well.
Yeah.
But yeah,
For sure. So we're neglecting, let's see, straight sets over Danielle Collins in the round of 32.
Oh yeah, Danielle
6-4,
Collins.
6-4.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
As the 19th seed, she beats the 10th seed, the 6th seed, Svitolina, who took out Paolini or someone
Right.
really good on the way. Svitolina's doing quite well. Beat her in 3. But I mean, the 3 sets, when I was watching the end of the Iga match, and they were both
6th seed, 5th seed, second seed, and first seed to get
the
title.
Yeah, absolutely. And I avoid saying the word incredible because it's not like it's unbelievable. I'm not incredulous over it. Just, I mean, inspiring at 29. She's going to be 30 in a couple of days, February the 17th, 1995. What a time for her to be born. But what was really impressive in the Iga match, and then there was a shade of this in the Sabalenka match as well, is there's a tenet that I came across, especially at that level of tennis, when they're so evenly matched in a lot of common principles and certainly ability. And when broadcasters, they make a mistake when they say that someone raises their level. Usually what it takes is maintaining your level. Because if you, it's the don't blink mentality. If you blink, and this was when I think of the 2019 Wimbledon final between Roger and Novak.
Yep.
So in that, Emily, I was talking about this with someone the other day, and I don't think he's going to listen to this. So there's this kid I met on my team who's a Parisian, grew up in Paris, went to Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute as an engineer. Now, then went to the London School of Economics, then studied in Italy, and now works for Lindt Chocolate. So I say he's my, whatever the French equivalent of the CIA is. That's my friend Tristan.
I was going to say London School of Economics. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So glad, good. We're on the same page. So he and I were rapping the other day, and he said, "Oh, I remember, watched every ball of that match." I said, "I don't think either of them let out a come on, let's go, like it was the most locked in tennis." And then the only blink was, it wasn't even a blink. I mean, it was just like when Novak hit that 15-40 return winner in the US Open when Roger had multiple match points, was up a couple of games. But that it can be, if we're even here, it can be that little of a drop, and then someone just runs with it. And Madison,
that was the only time I ever was rooted for Roger Federer. Like during that match, I wanted Roger Federer to win. I was not a big root against people, but I was not a big cheerer for Roger Federer in general. But during that match, like I did sentimentally wanted him to win.
Yeah, I was still in fan mode back then, and the whole time I was enthralled by the level, and what was already developing this burgeoning, blossoming admiration for Novak, and especially how he performed there. Of course, there's that heartbreaking meme of the woman, in the stands going one more to Roger, and it just wasn't enough. But what I saw from Madison in the Iga match, and then very much so at the end of the Sabalenka match in the final, was she maintained and then maybe slightly elevated her level a little bit. And it just felt like such a gap. Like to break Sabalenka emphatically in that final game was like, this is my fucking chance. I'm not going to be on the back foot. I'm not going to just do enough. Because at that level, when I've been teaching tennis lately, for people, especially at the net, who love to take a big backswing and try to cream the volley, when they just have their strings there and just make it happen, I say just enough is more than enough, which is not the case at that level. If you think you're going to do just enough and walk away with the trophy when someone like that is across the net from you,
you had to go for it.
You had to go for it, and she did. And I mean, I would like to think that her her relationship with her husband is part of that, because you said something really poignant, Emily, as you are wont to do, that he's not trying to get anything from her that he doesn't already have. They have a relationship. Ideally, it's filled with love and respect and kindness and all of that, and their mutual investment in her success.
Right.
I would imagine that there can be, unless you are able to, infiltrate in the best way the depths of a player coach relationship, that outside of what they have, that if a coach is coming to you with any sort of change, especially a technical change, which she adopted for her serve at least, and it sounds like there's more on the horizon, there can be a qualification, like the hallmark of this is Grigor Dimitrov. I know of the half dozen coaches that he's had, some of them have tried. I know of at least two that have tried to make changes in his game. I think he went on a run of like a new coach every 2 years.
Yep.
And so there's a distrust. Someone has not been able to break through to him and help him fix things with, his backhand, his forehand, his volley technique, whatever. But to be able to do that, ego set aside, is that we are here for you, Madison, and that anything we do is in service of you, not to advance the coaching career and the visibility of Bjorn Frantangelo.
Yeah, and he said he's not looking to coach
Oh,
or whatever, right? I will say one thing, especially because I talked about sort of my dislike of Iga last time we chatted. Yeah. I think that this was her most gracious loss. I think she was respectful and even complimentary to Madison at the net. And she did not have that look on her face, like, get me out of here right now. She looked disappointed, but it felt like that this was her most mature loss that I have seen at a major. She's been gracious in less important tournaments and matches and whatever. So I don't know if she's in a better place with her new coach, right? Or if this was just like, she was like, no, like Madison was better. Sometimes it's easy to accept, right? When someone, especially someone who's been trying to master it for so long, just is better that day. But I will say that I felt less disturbed by Iga's presence in this tournament than I have at other times. And so I remember I liked her the first year she won the French Open in 2020. She played with joy. If that person, or at least like that, can come halfway back to a balance of intensity and joy, I think that could be really beneficial for the rivalries and at the top of the game in tennis. But like the thing we've been seeing for the last 2 years is like unpleasant.
Yeah. It is. And joy being the capital word there.
Yeah.
That to infuse that play. And of course, that's why people are magnetized to Alcaraz, is that he can be joyous, when he is able to finish with a flurry and, maybe still not come out on top. It's that joyous effort that is there. One person that I think is, if not, I'm going to hit the siren button, the hot topic button, to get your take on someone who, and I don't really enjoy watching her. Again, I think part of the game is kind of ugly, and I don't really enjoy the technical side, and I'm starting to see the anxiety creep in. What do you think of Coco Gauff?
Well, obviously she's like a tremendously likable person.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Tremendously likable. And I have like a ton of respect for her athleticism and her movement and the professionalism with which she has approached matches since she was 14 years old.
Yeah.
She doesn't give up. She does, right? Like, kind of thing.
She will, as it said, I think her dad said this, or one of her coaches growing up, she will run barefoot across over broken glass to get to the ball.
Yeah.
And you got to respect the hell out of that.
Yeah. So all of those things are true. I was in the camp that was building until she won the US Open, a couple of years ago. I felt that, and I don't know, I'd have to think about how I feel about it now, but I was in the camp that I felt she should take a year off and fix her forehand.
Yep.
That Mary Jo Fernandez was sort of like championing that cause. But then, she made a coaching change and she went on a run. So everyone was kind of like, well, maybe not. I think that, obviously it's a hard decision to make because you're in the top 5 of the game, you're winning lots of titles, then you win a Grand Slam, right? And so it's like, do you exchange like that, what could happen over the course of that year for long-term like dominance? But if it doesn't happen, then you also stop yourself in the middle of like what was pretty good period of time in your career. I don't know how she is going to. I think she can continue, and she will win 500s. She'll win an
Yeah.
occasion Masters. She might even win one or two more Grand Slams. But I don't think she can become dominant with the forehand that she has, unless she becomes an absolute serve bot. And with the issues she has with second serve, I don't see that is possible right now. Even though
Yeah.
when she's having a good serving day, she's got a great serve. So I think those are the two options: is become a serve bot or fix the forehand. If for dominance, like the media wants to make her the next Serena Williams.
I would that's sort of what I was driving at is what, and we don't have to go full
Yeah,
cultural cynic. And I am wary because of my growing diet, media diet from the likes of you and the legend Danny Katz, to be wary of these things where these characters are, her and Tiafo, especially here in the States, have been foisted above. No love for Tommy Paul, hardly any love for Taylor Fritz. Ben Shelton, sort of. I mean, he's electric in his own way, but it's front and center, Foe and Coco.
so I think there's a couple of things. Like, obviously, when you get to New York, they're in Arthur Ashe Stadium, so
Yep.
there's like natural resonance, and there's like a super urban feel to the U.S. Open that none
Hmm.
of the other tournaments really have,
Yeah.
save maybe like you know like DC. You had sort of an urban feel, like DC, the DC tournament. It's a smaller tournament, right? So on some levels, like if you're going to grow tennis, you're in an area where baseball and basketball are really popular urban sports, and they have people who follow them that will follow Coco and Tiafo the way that they, right, kind of thing. So it's a natural marketing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's obviously the heir apparent. Like, I mean, I early on, the first time I saw Coco, I'm like, oh my God, they made a clone of Venus Williams,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, they combined the Serena and Venus in the Petri dish, and they
Yeah.
made. But she's a very different personality than
Yes.
either one of them, and she doesn't strike me as in any way artificial or fake or what. She seems like a very good person, and whatever the media is doing is what the media is doing. She's handling it to the best of her ability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, to your point though, like, why is there so much celebration of a number 30 player in Francis Tiafo?
Yeah.
And like on the down low, Tommy Paul has put together like a really impressive last 3 years, right? And you look at him, and like, he's an attractive guy, right? He's an attractive guy. He's got a relatable story. Like, his first year, like on first couple of years on tour, he would like show up drunk and fuck around, and then he got
Yep.
his shit together, and he likes sports. He's good at all of them. He likes fishing. He like whatever. He's handsome. His girlfriend has like a clothing whatever. Like, you'd think that there's like almost no attention for him, which I think actually for him probably works better.
Oh yeah.
But it is
For sure.
weird. And then obviously like Taylor Fritz, whatever like what we think about his like game style or his weird personality or relationship, like, he has earned the right to be the current king of American tennis. And it's like, he doesn't get that same love that Francis gets and whatever. Sure, America loves a good story and whatever, but like, I see the Coco thing as a little different. I think Coco is the real deal in terms of like, I think she deserves it's different. She has not underachieved. I think people maybe
No.
bit more they can chew for her. Like, I don't think she has a level of talent she's not living up to. I think she's like, so far she's living up to her talent, but if she wants to maximize, she's going to have to make a change. Otherwise, she's going to, have a career like kind of like maybe reverse of Jennifer Capriati, where it's like, we thought Jennifer Capriati would win 10 slams. She ended up winning
Oh,
3 late in her career. Coco might get those few early in her career. It'll still be a good career, but it'll always was like, well, she could never quite put it together. And it won't be because she was like naughty and misbehaved. It would be because there was this sort of like, let's play it safe. It was like the opposite reason to have like the same quality of career on some level, right?
yeah.
So I say go for it. I say, like, she's already a multimillionaire. She's already made tons of money in endorsements. Like, this is just what I would do. right? If I was 19 or 20 or however old she is, and have already won a Grand Slam, have won millions of dollars on the court and tens of millions of dollars earned off the court, I would say, I'm going to take the chance. If I never win another tennis match, I have enough money to live for life, right? And I already like made my mark. But if I go and commit to changing my forehand or becoming a serve bot or whatever it is, and I can go on like a run, that would be like amazing. Like that's what I would do. But I mean, she's her, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I don't. Yeah, I think it's different than Francis, but there is the same sort of cultural programming behind it. You know, and they do. They have electric smiles and personalities, Tiafo and Coco. The others are a little more reserved, so we don't know what it would be like if Taylor or Tommy were like super like engaging of the crowd or whatever. We'll never know if that were the case. If they were really charismatic and they were still not getting any attention, even if they were winning, then we'd have to go, okay, like we definitely see something here that but there's enough mitigating factors that it's hard to say that like it's completely cultural programming.
Oh, for sure. No, and thank you for grounding me in that. I agree that yeah, I mean, and you're on the right track because I think you have that disposition for growth and for people tapping into as much energy, of course, on the for the inner battery, for people to really transmute their ability into something truly great.
I'm, I'm,
And
I'm a huge Tommy Paul fan. I don't know if you ever
yeah,
heard my Synchromystic thread with Tommy Paul. If you go back in the old,
no, I feel like an ignoramus.
if you go on YouTube and you type in a word salad ATP 250, you will hear the story of my meeting with Tommy Paul and Francis Tiafo.
Oh,
But yeah, right. So like I ended up like damn splat in the middle of their literally shit in Francis Tiafoe's case. Yeah, I have a good Synchromystic thread about them. It was actually last year at the Dallas 250, which I didn't know I was attending, but somehow ended up there. And that's happening right now this week, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
a big Tommy Paul fan, and I think he could have a moment, right? He's already been putting together impressive stuff, but like, I think it's possible that he'll whip off a 29-year-old Wimbledon or some US Open or something like that, just by like continuing doing what he's doing and the way the cookie crumbles. I think he could be really good on grass. Like if there was a
Me
longer, I
too.
mean, he's won Eastbourne, right? If there was a longer grass season, he's a guy who needs reps. He needs like a few matches. He needs a few tournaments to really get going anytime there's a surface change and whatnot. If there was a longer grass season, then like he's the kind of player that you could make the case as a grass court specialist because he's got all the shots and he's got the movement. And even though he doesn't have a huge serve, his serve moves through the court in a way that's rewarded on grass.
Agreed. And I mean, that's why, yeah, I wish it was a purer medium for people to compete on because he would thrive there. And I
Yeah.
picked him, I think, when I did my preview in January last year. I predicted him to make a major final. I think that's still very much in the cards. You get a
Yeah.
break here and there. I mean, he's made semis. We talked about Madison Keys. She was in 7 major semis and
Yeah.
1 final
Yeah.
against Sloan, when she probably should have won that one.
Yeah,
And
I think he has a better chance of winning a major than Francis or Taylor.
oh yeah, definitely more than Francis. Ben should not be broken as often as he is. I think there's some focus again, pretty immature. For
Yeah.
what he's been thrust into as a professional, as at least a national, if not
I
an
think
international
Ben's
star.
time will come. I think he is
Yep.
learning discipline. Like the run he put together in Australia, while not as flashy as his U.S. Open run or the previous Australian Open run he had, showed a lot more discipline on keeping the ball in the court than he's shown before. I think he actually now needs to go, like, he needs to split his time between discipline and maximizing his serve, because his serve has gotten a little weird. He's
Mhm.
focused so much more on mixing it up, when like the mixing it up, you have to hit 155 bombs once in a while right to the corner in order for the mixing it up to have the effect that you want it to
Yeah.
have. But
Yep. Yeah, Roger would talk about that. He said, just mixing it up because, some for the sake of mixing it up, you still need to have a plan and you still need to execute that.
I, at the same Dallas ATP, which was last year a 250 and is this year a 500.
Yeah.
Last year, I was right next to Ben Shelton in the gym, and he has a.
What were you doing in that gym? What were you doing there?
I was working out
In whose gym?
in the gym at the hotel that I was at. So
That's
I
great.
was there on a work trip, and like I pull up and I see all these like ATP 250 signs, and I'm like, oh, what the fuck? And all the players staying there, right?
Oh, it's brilliant.
Early, go listen to the show. I don't want to ruin it for you. But of all the tennis players that I have stood next to, he is the most Adonis like. He has that most of like, this is an imposing god of stature, right? Like, I've never been near Rafa to know like what he felt like standing next to him. But Ben Shelton has a statuesque, imposing way he carries himself that leads me to believe that he will figure it out and have his moment, right? Like, he's got to grow up a little bit. And he's also like a new tennis player. He didn't start playing tennis until like junior high school or high school or something like that.
Yep.
So he still is a student, having to become a student of the game, right?
For sure. And has the benefit in the way that, I mean, his dad was a great college coach, and I think in college you do have to be a full package. There's interesting things that I'm learning again from the Spanish system, wherein there's a reason that Carlos Moya was working with Rafa. There's a reason that Juan Carlos came and worked with Carlos. Is that's their culture, is that the pros want to have that mentorship for the up and comers, and it is more of that. I mean, even Darren Cahill is not a technical or maybe even a tactical genius. He does have a lot of experience on the tour, and that is his greatest merit. That I believe that is, I'm making a blanket statement. This is from people who are in the world. That is the case for most coaches in the box. Brian, as a player and then as a developmental coach in college, has a really good balance. And I think that I mean, I think he was number 9 in the world and was a handful for most people of his time in a really competitive era. And that's, I mean, as far as father-son dynamics go, could be promising.
I can't remember if it was Gil or Andy Roddick, and if it was Gil, I can't remember if it was on his own regular podcast or on 3, which they just did an episode of for the first time in a while. Somebody brought up the idea that maybe Brian should consider bringing Goran Ivanisevic in as a consultant on the serve, right? And I actually think that would be a really good idea, right? Because I understand Brian is trying to build discipline with Shelton on the backhand and on like the rally balls and things like that. But like it has come, in my opinion, at some of the expense of like the focus on the serve, which his game should be predicated on. And so if you have Goran coming in, who was able to, help Djokovic make the most of his serve, help even a serve bot like Milos Raonic make the most of his serve, right? Like some of these, almost a separate coach for the serve for Ben than for the rest of the game, I think at this time might be helpful. I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, for sure. There is fertile ground for specialists there, and I mean, and Goran is a great example. And yet, I mean, the point I'll drive home as we prepare to land the plane, because I do have a brisket on the big green egg at the moment that I need to tend to, and I'll sprinkle in one other thought. But what we're talking about, which again, you have that growth mindset, encouraging people to access as much of their highest and best potential as possible. You do, for most of us, and I mean, it's potentially the case for even the world-class elite athletes that we're looking at. If you're top 300, you're still world-class. And we're talking about people top 25 and then top 3, in Coco's case, and top 10 in Ben's place potentially. You do get worse before you get better. Mm-hmm. And the incentive, like you said, is, I mean, Coco's made some huge money, Ben's made some good money. The incentive when you're playing a match for most of them is to win. And to say, I'm going to commit to this technical or tactical change for best of 3, come what may, is for someone as hyper competitive as a Coco Gauff, as a Ben Shelton, as really anyone up there, where their drive and their will gets them so far. That's probably too tall of an order, to say nothing of people who are fringe top 50 who are still almost scratching and clawing to make a living.
Yeah,
And I mean, that
that is what Madison Keys did. She spent all fall last year accepting discomfort as she made equipment and tactical changes, right? So there's an example of in that case, it was worth it. Real quick, were you done with that thought? Because I want to, I have two quick things before we land the plane and eat brisket. My mouth is now watering for. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say something about some of the fantastic matches that happened early in the tournament, especially with the young kids upsetting some of the, standard bearers, right? Joao Fonseca, Lerner Tien, Alex Michelson, I think they say it.
Yeah, Mickelson's run was superb.
Yeah, all three of those guys were, even though Fonseca's was shorter, it was like, wow, that's going to be incredible, probably. And then also what to make of Alexander Zverev.
Yeah, so I had been watching the next gen finals, and I mean, Joao Fonseca has been on the radar. He, I would say, of most of the players under the age of 20 or 19, has the best technique.
And
the most potential, because you have that is technique equals tactics. Gives you the best range to be able to hit any shot. When you have an extreme grip, there are shots you can't hit. When you have limitations in your rhythm, if you have a reset backhand like even Alcaraz does, which is when you take it low to start and then you have to go high because then you have to go low again to get under the ball and hit true top. There are limitations there. Alcaraz has a much better forehand because it actually goes high, low, high. Fonseca's got it all, and he plays like that. And when he came up against Arthur Fies, who qualified for next gen because he's just about 20 years old and yet is still a top 20 player, handled him because he's got it. So he's there. Mickelson is, I think, we talked about blue collar early on in the best way, because, I mean, okay, he doesn't move like Sinner, fine. He still moves really well. Was watching him play doubles in Dallas the other day. He can do that too. I absolutely saw him from the jump, and the way he was all over Tsitsipas. I said, this is the level of tennis that is, top 20 tennis. Yeah. And he's there. And Lerner Tien, I don't know quite what to make of, because I watched him play some next gen too. I mean, to have that mental strength.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always such a cliche. But against, Medvedev was fairly stalwart in that too. And to have it go to the wire and to come out the better on that stage is tremendous. And I think it's deeply inspiring to have that crop, especially two Americans. I know Lerner Tien is appreciably younger than Mickelson. It gives me hope. I'm stoked on those guys. Again, to have more, to have a deep and compelling round of 16 at almost every tournament, instead of it's going to be Sinner and Alcaraz waxing people.
And to see the two young American tennis players displaying strength at the same spots that the Americans of recent generations have had shortcomings. Being in shot making, not being flashy, using tactics, having a decent backhand. In Mickelson's case, a great backhand, right? I'm seeing them sort of plug up the holes that were in the raft left by the previous generation for them.
For sure, and I when you know better, you do better. And I think they came up under coaches who have been able to channel that. And Mickelson especially is someone who has, we can say tactics, but a great question my coaches that I've studied under have asked, ask a player, what patterns do you play? Serve +1 is not a pattern. That's not a plan. That's what you get when you get a short ball after a great serve. Do you have patterns that you can go to? And, the adage, I may have been Virginia Wade and OG from Tennis Lore, is you never change a winning strategy. You always change a losing strategy.
Yep.
And she also said, one of my favorite quotes about tennis, beautiful tennis leads to winning tennis. Winning tennis does not always lead to beautiful tennis.
Yeah. Yep. All right, and Zverev, and then it's brisket time.
And that's right. Zverev, I have often criticized his game between the ears, and he came out. I think when he's at his best, he is very. Even so, I mean, there was a great interview with him, the walk and talk they did behind the scenes of the AO. He said, "Pre-match for me, it's piano, it's classical. I'm very subdued, very chill, retains his energy. When the outburst comes, I think they're great. But from the jump in that match, I mean, I think." Early on when things weren't going his way, he was chatty. He seemed very edgy. And there is something about that for his, he has 23 titles in his career, which I mean, I think is impressive. There's a smattering of masters sprinkled in there. Um, there is something missing, not just on his mental side. I mean, for every big guy, Emily, who can serve like that and is going to back up most returners, he can volley from 3 steps behind the service line and be in control at that point if he were to serve and volley. I know it's everyone says it, but he has the angles on that because of his height, because of his dexterity on the serve, that he can absolutely put himself in positions to do that, or at least be more on the front foot. I get it. Slow balls, slow courts. He's been very vocal about that. But some of the things the power of language. I think some of the things that he speaks on limits himself. I mean, he's spoken about even post match. I was sorry to hear kind of the way, I think he said something to the effect of like, at this rate, I may never get one. And I mean, he may go in with that belief. And I'm like, that would not surprise me at all. Is like, you know, I am the underdog. I am the lesser. Because he plays like that in some of those matches. A healthy. We can't even really talk about the semi. He didn't have a full a fully there adversary.
I think he needed that match. I think had he defeated Djokovic in that match, he would have gone in with more confidence than he went in having not defeated.
Yeah.
And I think Sinner would have been shaking in his boots a little bit about,
yeah,
right? I find
and Zverev can, and I thought if Novak were healthy, I didn't think he was a shoo-in to win. I think that was the match that Zverev, and I know they have a friendship, that can make things, a bit tenuous as well. And yet, I thought that Zverev, that could have been a match that he leveled up for, and he did. He found a way. It was still a sort of a tense first set that they played to the tiebreak. I think it was still over an hour, almost 80 minutes. But I'm with you. I was thinking, if that's the final that we get, and Zverev has to walk through the fire that is Novak, then he would be in alpha mode, and he hasn't reached that mode yet.
I think Alexander Zverev, low key, like you have to have a specific set of eyes to see it, is probably one of the most compelling characters on the ATP tour for a really entirely different set of reasons than Carlos or Yannick or like Rafa or whatever, or Federer, maybe a little closer to Djokovic, but in an entirely different way. I have, and I'm just going to tease this, and maybe we'll talk about this sometime, but this is maybe a conversation for something that goes behind a paywall because it's a lot of conjecture or just me adding my imagination or some of my sort of clairvoyant skills to the analysis. I think there's a lot going on with him in his inner world, in his familial line, and
Russian familial line for people who don't know.
In Germany, another one of these ones coached by his father, who it doesn't really work when he's coached by anyone else, even though I think everybody agrees that, like, to maximize his game, maybe he does need to be coached by somebody else. I have this, like, I like him, like, as a player. I think that I don't believe all of the propaganda about him. I don't think he's a perfect character. I think he's probably done some fucked up shit, but I also think that at a certain point that it became clear that you could make lots of money and headlines by accusing him of this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah, there's an economy for that. Yep.
Right. But he's not someone I like spend a lot of time thinking about, or at least I didn't for a long time. But when I'm in one of my states where I'm having a lot of like sort of psychic activity or insight or remote view type stuff come on, he shows up over and over again, which is like I have a few people that like they're not people I think about on a regular basis, but whenever I'm in that state, they're like there, and I'm like, why are they there? Why is the person that I would like maybe want to think about not there, but this person's there? And he's one of those people for me. And I think that he has been fucked with on a level that is probably for him at times unbearable. And I think that that is probably the cause of some of the outbursts and behaviors that we have seen. And I think he's a fascinating character. I think he's super, like, it's not, although I'd say, like, actually in the last few months, he's had a lot of really interesting things to say. I've enjoyed some of the interviews with him. I think he's giving us more of a more mature insight into himself, and he's displayed a sense of humor in ways we maybe didn't see before. But like, I have a lot of thoughts about what might be going on there. And sometimes it's fun to have a conversation, or like maybe not fun is a word in this case. It would be interesting to map that out and see if any of that lands for you sometime. But
how dare you tease us with it? How dare you, Emily? The audacity to tease us with that, because I seriously, like, my experience was just I just locked in on you and just imagining the potential scenarios of what that could mean for him, because I do sense that there is, as with most of them, there is more than meets the eye. He so he's April 20th, I'm April 21, he's 97, I'm 94. But I think he and Hubert Hurkacz, of all people, share a birthday. Or they're like a day, and Hurkacz is such a
totally
what's that? Oh yeah,
totally different personalities. Okay, yeah,
oh
yeah.
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 Oh, massively. So yeah, I do have a magnetism to him as well, and find him, especially with the familial elements, his character, how he's handled things so publicly, success, criticism, the highs and lows. I mean, I am very keen to see how the rest of his career and life plays out. I'm very keen to have the pleasure and privilege of chatting with you again.
Awesome.
This really does light me up, Emily, too, because we've explored many of the depths of tennis and just how potent and magical and inspirational it is. And it warms my heart to have this virtual connection with you, where we can convene and expand our consciousness and enthusiasm around this. So
Awesome.
thank you, Emily.
I loved it, and I think we should put a pin on the schedule for between Indian Wells and Miami, and then maybe after
Deal.
like let's not let the whole thing pass, because it becomes too much to talk about. Like, let's do one right after Indian Wells, sort of right between, and then we can see if we want to do one after Miami if anything interesting happens there.
Deal. I still love Indian Wells, even though they've gone full Oracle. I went there in 23. Actually, no, we went last year in 24. We were there for the Alcaraz Zverev B.
We were there too.
Oh, did you were you there for the Alcaraz Zverev B fiasco?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the whole week was weird. I mean, we were there all that week, and I think we left that Saturday. Went to Joshua Tree for the first time, which was really special. Had a great time overall. The first time I went was in 2019, and in 48 hours time, day one, we saw Roger and Novak practice on neighboring courts, and then the next day we saw Roger and Rafa play their respective quarterfinal matches, which was just surreal. And I have this great picture from the practice court: Novak in the near court practicing with Fonini, Rogers in the far court hitting with like a teenager or something. And so it's these two, same side of the court, and then the snow-capped mountains in the back.
Nice.
And it's such a special place, and I will go back. Last year was fun. Again, there's always weird stuff going on there.
Those are sacred grounds. Empire Polo Field, where Coachella is, and Tennis Garden, like they're the kind of powerful land that, like, we hear, okay, like people make the pilgrimage to Mecca for like this religious thing, that it's that potent of land for something a little different than those religious but not really, right? We're going to the desert to worship Venus and Serena or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I love Palm Springs. I love that whole area. I spent a lot of time there my whole life. Maybe we'll meet up at a tennis tournament sometime. That would be awesome.
At the very least, we will talk about it. So count on that. Thank you for being so gracious with your insight and your time, Emily.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.